So you want to bank offshore. You want to bank in the best jurisdictions that you can possibly access. And that means you probably want safe, secure, and stable banks that you can trust to take care of your money. And you'd probably like straightforward account opening with as few headaches as possible. Does that sound about right? If so, in this video, I'm going to share offshore jurisdictions where you can find banks that tick all of these boxes, ranging from deposits as low as $5,000 all the way up to $5 million. So there's gonna be something here for everyone. Now, if this is your first time on the channel, my name is Chris. I'm the head of banking relationships at GlobalBanks. We're a team of banking experts who help businesses and individuals overcome cross-border banking challenges, including helping our clients navigate the available jurisdictions and deciding which place is best for them to establish new banking relationships. Okay, so before jumping into the specific countries, we do need to frame this conversation a bit by defining what offshore really means. Now, here at GlobalBanks, we define offshore banking as banking in an offshore financial center or offshore banking hub. In other words, countries that intentionally offer bank accounts and financial services to non-residents through offshore banks. And while that may seem stupidly obvious, you'd be surprised how many of the big brand publishing houses think that offshore banking actually includes places like Germany or Canada, when it definitely does not. You see, banks in Canada, Germany, and every other onshore jurisdiction, they tend to focus on local residents and local businesses. At the very least, banks in these countries, they require clear ties in order for someone to qualify to open a bank account. Now, that doesn't mean you can't bank in Germany, Canada, or any other country as a foreign non-resident. It just means that it's typically more difficult and you will need to jump through more hoops. Now, if banking in onshore jurisdictions is what you're looking for, we cover over 100 countries in terms of banking and financial services over on our website, globalbanks.com. So check that out after the video. But right now, we're talking about offshore banking. And assuming you're not a citizen or resident of a blacklisted or sanctioned country, you're not personally on a sanctions list or watch list, and your name isn't plastered all across international news saying that you're a horrible person, you should be able to open accounts in the countries that I'm about to share with you. Of course, you will still need to supply the necessary documents, meet account opening requirements, and make a qualifying deposit. But the last hurdle you're going to have to overcome is navigating the account opening process for each bank and making sure you're talking to the right bankers. That information is not easy to find, and many compliance teams, they have unwritten rules that could make you ineligible from the outset. Now, while we won't be discussing specific banks in this video, we do break down those details and bank-specific account opening requirements over at GlobalBanks IQ. More on that later. Right now, let's dig into our first jurisdiction. And in no particular order, we're starting over in the Channel Islands in Jersey. Now, if you're not familiar with Jersey, this is a very interesting banking hub. And right now, it's actually one of my favorites. First, it offers unique offshore banking options across retail, premier, private, corporate, and even custodian banking. Certain Jersey banks can even offer non-resident mortgages if you're looking for investment properties in the UK and even in a few EU countries. Plus, like all good banking hubs, the Jersey political landscape is simple, predictable, and lawmakers here basically have one unspoken rule, which is do what's in the best interest of the financial sector. And if that wasn't enough, here's an extra bonus. Jersey bankers, they're more open and flexible than bankers in many other places. So they're willing to work with prospective clients up to a point and try to make account opening work. Now, deposits in Jersey, they generally start around $75,000, and private banking typically ranges between $500,000 and $1 million. But like elsewhere, deposits, they can range depending on your client profile, your risk profile, and basically whether or not the bank actually wants you as a client. But overall, Jersey's a very solid banking jurisdiction with a good reputation that allows remote opening at reasonable deposit levels. And it has solid banks. Now, next up is a favorite destination for basically everyone on the internet right now, and that is Singapore. Now, without a doubt, Singapore is one of the best banking jurisdictions in the world today. Whether you're looking to open premier or private bank accounts, if you have the right client profile and you can afford to bank here, it is definitely worth considering. Singapore banks, they're fiscally responsible, well capitalized, and once you're in, they offer a very high caliber of service. And the same is true for the country. Now, Singapore is one of the best managed countries on earth. It's clean, it's efficient, it's well built, and it's generally just a good place to be. And while that may seem trivial when we're talking about opening offshore bank accounts, it does matter when you're trying to decide where to open offshore accounts, because how a society operates will be reflected in how banks and bankers treat you and your money. But while it's still possible to open in Singapore as a non-resident, it has become considerably more challenging. I actually just did a whole video about banking in Singapore, which I'll have linked below. And this video is actually going to be a really important watch if you're from the US, UK, Canada, EU, Australia, or basically any country in the Western world. And the reason is Singapore has made some recent changes that have made it extremely difficult for citizens and residents of these countries to bank in Singapore. So if that's you, it's definitely worth giving that a watch. Now, in terms of deposits in Singapore, you should be looking to leave at least 150,000 in the bank, but you'll have more options if you can increase that to 250,000. Of course, like anywhere, it doesn't need to sit in a deposit. It can be invested, put in a CD, or allocated to other bank products. And if you want to enter Singapore at the private banking level, there you're going to need to look at depositing between $1 million and $5 million as a minimum, depending on the bank. Individuals with higher risk profiles, they can still find interesting banking options in Singapore, but they're going to need to be looking to come in at a much higher level than the minimum deposits that banks are going to be advertising on their websites. Now, jumping back across the globe to Latin America, let's take a look at Panama. Now, we like Panama. It's a great first step into the world of international and offshore banking. And if you're coming in at a minimum deposit, say around the $10,000 mark, Panama is an underrated option. What we often see people doing is skipping over Panama and looking at far worse banking jurisdictions instead. This is probably due to the Panama Papers hangover, but really, certain banks in Panama and the Panama banking regulator are very well managed and they take their jobs very seriously. Unfortunately, most of the other channels and publishers that talk about banking in Panama, they get the country, the banks, and the opportunity completely wrong. They try to push people either into one of the big banks that won't accept foreign non-residents, or banks that require deposits between $100,000 and $250,000. And frankly, this level of deposit, it doesn't make a lot of sense when you're considering Panama as an offshore banking jurisdiction when compared to other places like Singapore, the Isle of Man, or Jersey that are home to international banks with global footprints and can offer you a wider range of services, often with lower costs. That's why it's so important to choose the right banking jurisdiction based on your profile, your objectives, your deposit level, and your tolerance for fees, which is what we help our clients do with our dedicated account opening service, GlobalBanks Insider. So again, choosing the right bank in Panama that matches your profile, it can result in remote account opening, relatively low deposits, and offshore banking in a stable jurisdiction. So if you're interested in opening an offshore bank account, you don't want to come in with a very high deposit, and maybe you're looking for a dollarized economy, Panama is an excellent option that you should probably be looking at. Next up, one of the most misunderstood and mischaracterized banking hubs out there, Switzerland. Yes, Switzerland. You wouldn't think that such an established banking jurisdiction could be misunderstood. But unfortunately, the who's who of the offshore banking world will tell you that Swiss banks are stuck up, pretentious, and stuffy. In my experience, nothing could be further from the truth. And frankly, it just tells me that they don't understand private banking, or they aren't depositing enough money to take advantage of the services that are being offered by Swiss banks. I say that because the level of sophistication and products that individual clients can access through Swiss private banking, it's only available in a few other jurisdictions. In fact, even in these other jurisdictions like Singapore, Hong Kong, or the UAE, it's often the regional offices of the Swiss banks that are able to offer more sophisticated and complex client solutions. And the reason for that, it's pretty simple. That's what they do. The way we see it, Swiss banks, they're familiar with complex international clients engaged in cross-border trade and investments. That makes compliance teams and onboarding staff at Swiss banks particularly adept at onboarding more challenging client profiles. It's also why Swiss banks are among the best at navigating the complexities of high-risk profiles, including investors with crypto-sourced wealth or other high-risk sources of income. Now, there are downsides to banking in Switzerland, and the deposits required to get in, they tend to be higher than most places. But unlike many of the international banks in expat hubs like Singapore or the UAE, certain Swiss banks, they'll be more flexible, especially if you're looking to grow a relationship over time. This is very different to the quota-driven approach at most of the international banks, where relationship managers are essentially salespeople and they change on a regular basis. I've even had managing directors at some of the oldest and most prestigious Swiss private banks tell me that they're happy to onboard accounts with as little as $100,000 if it's a good customer with a long-term vision for the relationship. Of course, if you want Swiss banks to take you seriously and you actually want to benefit from the wide range of complex products and services available, you should really be looking to enter Swiss banks with at least $500,000, though usually above $1 million is good practice. Now, let's go in a completely different direction. How about an incredibly well-managed offshore banking hub with strong international banks where you can open accounts with as little as $5,000? Yes, this is available, it's not a myth, and it exists in the Isle of Man. Similar to Jersey, the Isle of Man is an expat banking hub and it offers retail, premier, and private banking. The The Isle of Man also has commercial banking, though this is typically reserved for companies with local registered agents or existing bank relationships with one of the banks on the island. The Isle of Man, it has a solid reputation. It is not labeled as a tax haven, it won't be found on any of the international blacklists, and while it has been around for a very long time as a banking jurisdiction, it still flies somewhat under the radar. So the Isle of Man is considered cleaner, better regulated, and more respected than many of the other offshore jurisdictions that we have on this list. Now, like I said, deposits, they start around $5,000 for personal banking, and they bump up to about $50,000 to $100,000 for premier banking, depending on where you're looking to open. Similar to other banking hubs though, the banks here, they do have restrictions in terms of citizenship and residency. So before you go applying to all of the banks, you do need to consider which banks will actually accept you. Interestingly though, certain banks on the Isle of Man, they can be flexible in terms of the clients that they onboard. And this includes citizenship and residency in countries that most other banks would consider high risk. Think Africa, Asia, and the Middle East. Okay, I have another 5 offshore banking jurisdictions to share with you, and these are places that you should really be considering if you want to open bank accounts offshore. One of them is in the Mediterranean, another one is stuck in the middle of the Caribbean, 2 under the radar options are deep in the heart of Europe, and one final option is hiding just off the coast of France. We've included all of these, plus more details on the 5 jurisdictions that I just shared in a free guide that you can grab in the pinned comment below. This guide is free, just click the link in the description and download your copy. And if you are a citizen or resident of the US, UK, EU, Canada, Australia, or basically any other Western country, and you do want to explore your banking options in Singapore, yes, some do exist, this video right here is an extremely important watch and will basically tell you whether you can bank in Singapore or not. So go ahead and click that, and I'll see you over there right now.